Good afternoon, and welcome to the Royal Statistical Society here in London. It's a great pleasure to see everyone. A couple of housekeeping things first of all. There's no fire alarms. If there were one, we should go out of the emergency exits here, follow the fire marshals and assemble outside there. Bathrooms out that way. My name's Shirley Coleman. I'm from Newcastle University, and it's my pleasure to share this meeting today. So this is the second of the discussion papers that we've had this year, and with the title "A System of Population Estimates Compiled from Administrative Data Only," as written up there. We welcome an online audience. We have a lot of people signed on online, as well as the people in the room here, which is excellent. Obviously, the people online will please turn your cameras off and mute your speakers, your microphones. Unless you're called later to speak, when we hope you will do in the open session. Importantly, a recording of the meeting will be posted on the RSS YouTube in due course, YouTube channel. And if you don't want to be filmed, then please tell us, and we can edit you out. If you have any difficulties online, just use the support chat box. The purpose of a discussion meeting is for people to join in, so you're very welcome to offer your contribution when we're called for contributions from the floor in due course after the talks. If you want to speak, please raise your hand, but it's important to come up to the lectern to speak because of the recording, please. And it's also important to say your name and affiliation so that we can follow up with you, because contributions are published, as you probably know, and attributed to the contributor. So I think we can start in a minute. First of all, the paper will be presented by John Dunn from the Central Statistics Office in Ireland, and will be published in the Journal of the Royal Statistical Society Series A in this year, 2023. Co-author Lee Chun Zhang from University of Southampton and Statistics Norway is also here and will be available for comments later. So I think now, without more ado, it's my great pleasure to hand over to Dr. Dunn. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a great honour and privilege to be here at this discussion meeting. This paper, the System of Population Estimates Compiled from Administrative Data Only, was co-authored with Lee Chun, who was actually my PhD supervisor while we were doing this work. So I hope you find it of value. Just to start, I've always pressed wrong, but just to start. Again. Okay. Oh yeah, just to give a spoiler alert. Well, the focus of the talk is on presenting a system of population estimates compiled from administrative data only, and arguing the robustness of that system. Really, the two key takeaways for me are that, number one, without a central population register, we really need some kind of estimation method or methodologies beyond the rules-based approach when compiling population estimates from administrative data. The second key takeaway is the PECADO toolkit, a DSE-based toolkit, is applicable in a broad range of settings and has the potential for future success. Actually, it's really simple. In the way it's formulated here, it's really simple to use and to extend in the way it's set up. And I really hope that comes across in the paper. Quite often we refer to population estimates compiled from administrative data only as the Irish PECADO project, and that's the working name we had given that in the CSO. The presentation today will follow the same outline as in the paper, so it's just really following the roadmap that's there in the paper. So just to get into a little bit about the problem statement, I suppose the motivation really starts from the CSO enumerated 4.74 million people in the census in 2016. That was at a cost of 60 million, or over €12 per person to do that. Ireland conducts a traditional census in that we don't have an online collection. We have a field force that we employ every 5 years that goes out to every house, drops off a form and picks it up. Those census counts are then used to anchor our population estimates. The current system of population estimates we call it a flows first based system. It's like the component method. We first estimate the flows and then increment forward a year to get to compile our post-censal estimates. Then once the next census comes out, we adjust those post-censal estimates with the census counts to get our intercensal estimates, such that those population estimates are coherent with the census population counts. So the motivation really for this work was really, can we produce coherent population estimates in a timely manner at a reduced cost? Can we actually remove the need to revise our estimates every 5 years? I think even if we were able to remove that need to revise estimates every 5 years, what would that do for all the other statistics that rely on population estimates, per capita or per person type statistics that we produce? It removes a big headache from people. Can we also remove the dependency on these poor population flow estimates? They're really hard. In Ireland, it's really hard to estimate these particular migration flows. So can we move to a stocks first basis? Can we go in and directly estimate the population each year? And then can this then act as a catalyst to change the census model, to move it from our traditional model to one based on administrative data, or at the very least remove the need to do a quinquennial or a 5-yearly census and move to a 10-yearly census and give us a little bit more breathing space? So to go down this road, we really need to start with being able to compile robust population estimates on an annual basis. So simple idea that we all start with is to compile a statistical population data set from administrative data sources. And the ideal SPD will have one record per person for the target population. When we're compiling statistical population data sets, we could probably end up with 4 different types of error. As we heard from Eleanor, overcoverage and undercoverage. Domain misclassification, if you have an age or something else wrong or one of the attributes wrong, that can probably affect linking as well. And then also linkage error, if we're actually counting people twice instead of once or so forth. Okay. So I think a lot of the approaches to compiling a statistical population data set focus on minimizing the number of errors in that statistical population data set in the first place, and then trying to correct in some way for them. Our strategy is a little bit different. Instead of trying to minimize the number of errors, we actually focus on just trying to manage one type of error. So we're minimizing the types of errors. So we're only dealing with undercoverage. So the idea, picking up from the earlier talk, is we build our statistical population data set based on a science of life approach, where we see evidence that somebody has engaged with a public administration system in the given year, we will count that person as being present in the population. That, by definition, will probably give us undercoverage. So we will need to adjust the SPD counts then to obtain population estimates. So as I said, in building the SPD, we will use a science of life. By definition, this will provide a data set with undercoverage only, whereby we focus on transactions and interactions in the given year. The one thing, as I mentioned earlier in the talk earlier, in the administration systems in Ireland, we have a very high quality person identification number called a PPSN, which allows error-free linkage. We also choose the population concept which we reckon will best match what we're trying to do. And the argument for choosing this type of population concept at this basis is we can then tune that concept to whatever we want after by say adding or subtracting bits of migration or emigration and immigration to get to a point in time. So our population concept here is the idea of an annual resident population. So if you're deemed to be resident in the state at any period in the year, so if you're resident for a significant period of time, say 6 or 12 months, okay? And then we can use dual system estimation as the traditional approach for dealing with undercoverage. One other trick we do here is we actually withdraw the driver's file from our statistical population data set, and we don't actually use that in the compilation of our population data set. We keep it kind of a driver's activity file back. So, and what I mean by the driver's activity file, I mean is persons that will have either renewed their driving license or applied for a new driving license in that given year. So we have nothing from our driver data set in our SPD. So we keep that back and we use that then as the list B in our to adjust for undercoverage. So there's a couple of ideas there. One is the science of life, one is the population concept, and another is actually withdrawing an administrative data source to use to adjust for undercoverage. Okay, I want to just move on to the toolkit next and go through a restatement of the DSE, which we hope will hopefully will convey how easy it is to use now and in this restatement. So we start off with our assumptions. So no erroneous records, matching assumption, no linkage error between list A and list B. And then list B has equal capturability or homogeneous capture, as we might call it. So that means that every unit in the population has an equal chance of being caught in list B. So if we start then, so list A, this is a key thing to really get into grips with. And I think this is really a simple but smart idea. List A is any fixed list. So you don't have to treat it as variable. So it's list A of size X, full stop. So then the expected value of lists of the size of list B is the expected value of n. We can get that just simply by definition, that's the size of the population by pi, the chance of being caught in the list, okay? The expected size of the match, again, with the equal catchability assumption, no erroneous records, the expected size of the match given the list, the fixed list, is actually X, the size of the list, by pi, the probability being caught in list B. What we do next is to get our estimator for the population size is we simply we write two equations for pi, what we have here, and we equate both of these equations. We replace the expected value of the match by n and the expected value of little n by n itself, and we end up with our dual system estimator, nx divided by n. It's still the same estimator, okay? But the assumptions now are far more relaxed. We don't talk about independence between lists. We don't talk about equal catchability in two lists. There's only equal catchability in one list. The other list is fixed. So in the end now, we just have a dual system estimator with two variables, okay? We bring in the assumption of independent capture within list B. So if you're caught, if a unit of population is caught in list B, it doesn't impact another unit of population being caught in list B. The implications here are, one, our broader range of scenarios or settings now can be considered for the application of the dual system estimator. And number two, it becomes a lot easier to extend. And I will show a couple of examples of that in how we're going. So now we have an extensible toolkit that's actually with relaxed assumptions that can be applied in a far broader range of scenarios. So we started off with signs of life, but what if we got some of those signs of life wrong and said, well, geez, we let erroneous records into our SPD or something like that, even though it was by design, but some way snuck in the back door or whatever. So now we're going to look at an extension of the DSE toolkit to actually be able to deal with erroneous records. So this is quite interesting because now we're using DSE to deal with erroneous records or overcoverage, where it's traditionally been used for undercoverage. So we start with, we consider the naive estimator where we have or erroneous records in list A, and we simply call that NX over M. We've dropped the assumption of no erroneous records in list A, and there we have, so we're letting them in there, okay? What we really want, the ideal estimator is, we want to estimate list A as X minus or without the erroneous records, okay? But the problem is, we don't know what or is, okay? We don't know where the erroneous records lie, okay? So the question we pose here is, can we some way extend the toolkit to improve on the naive estimator, okay? So this is where we introduce the idea of trimming. I think I'm missing something with a sneaky bit of animation came in. Yes. So the idea here is if we consider a trimming of list A, okay? So we take a slice off list A. There's three parts to that slice. There's small a, which is the part of list A in the slice that contains erroneous records. There's small b, the part in list A which are not erroneous but are unmatched to list B. And then we've got part C, again, which are in list A, but they're not erroneous, but they are also in the match to with list B. That will give us, in our trimmed estimator here, that will give us n x minus k over n minus k1, where k1 is C taken out of the match, and k is the full slice taken off list X, okay? If we're trimming at random, k over x is going to be, the expectation is that k over x will be the same as k1 over n, and that the trimmed estimator will be the same as the naive estimator. We've rewritten the notation for the naive estimator using a 0 here in the estimator here, just to, there's a small change in notation, but just to flag that up. Basically, this will happen if we had no idea where the erroneous records are, okay? And we just trimmed. It'd be effectively kind of trimming at random. But what if we had some idea or some suspicion about where the erroneous records actually are? And we could do something like trim like this, whereby we're actually capturing more of the erroneous records such that the expectation is k over x is greater than k1 over n. That will lead to our trimmed estimator, the expectation of our trimmed estimator being less than the naive estimator. It will do better than just using the naive estimator. You should note that there is a cost in trimming, okay? The cost in trimming comes in the variance estimator. So typically, as you're trimming, the variance estimator can be getting larger, or will be getting larger. So if you think about this, you can progressively trim and keep going until we get as low as we can in our trimmed estimator, but we have a payoff with our variance estimator. So the first idea we had is you could actually score all your records based on your suspicion whether they're erroneous or not, and keep incrementally shaving them. You could try different strategies, and really an effective trimming strategy will get you down close to the ideal estimator without too much cost in terms of your variance estimator. Okay. So we'll use that later in our approach to the population estimates, where we're showing that, okay, we want to show that, you know, our population estimate is robust. There's no erroneous record sneaking in. We use this idea later, and we'll come to that in a bit. Another extension of we can look at here is we can consider a violation of the homogeneous capture assumption, what the implications are. Sorry, there's just a few remarks here. These are just remarks extracted from the paper, and they actually they're about the behavior of the trimmed estimator and what it would indicate as we go through. Okay, and they're just useful to note. So, yeah. So, what if we consider our partition of the population into two groups where the probability of being caught in list B may differ between those two groups, okay? If we ignored our partition, we can just simply have our simple estimator. If we don't ignore that partition, we consider a stratified estimator, and that would be the way to go ideally if we know that there is. What we can do is subtract one from the other and look at the difference between the simple estimator and the stratified estimator to get an understanding of what happens with that violation. The yellow underline is really where the catch rates are the same between Group A and Group B, or sorry, in this case, Group 1 and Group 2. But if they're not the same, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a large bias. It doesn't necessarily mean there is any bias, because if the coverage rates are also the same, X1 over N1 is the same as X2 over N2, then that will give us 0 down here and here, and we can see then that there's no bias. We can also see where the difference is driven by the various parameters in the form. The paper also includes a test for heterogeneous in the catch rates across a number of groups, and that's quite useful as well in considering testing for heterogeneity. Okay, so that's the toolkit as we've got it presented in the paper. So how do we go about using it? So we want to try and use it in a smart way. So we try and use it in a smart way, in a way that will demonstrate the robustness of our estimates. So we start off, we build our SPD using our science of life approach. We choose our list B, which is the driver license activity. We compile our population estimates. What we do then is, remember our list B? What we want to do is we want to validate B, see in some way, can we validate that it's appropriate and adhering to the homogeneous capture assumption. So in our paper, the way we've done that is we've thought of another survey. We've come across another list, a survey, household survey, which has equal catchability by design. In it is the quarterly national household survey for 2016, now rebranded the Labour Force Survey in Ireland. An exercise we have in Ireland is in the CSO in Ireland is we actually try and link our survey data with administrative data after to try and augment it in as much as we can. So we probably get about 80–90% match in terms of our survey respondents with accurate PPSN numbers. You know, we don't add a PPSN number unless we're sure. Okay. We consider the survey non-response as missing at random, and we also consider those that we can't match as missing at random, just so that we can use that assumption of homogeneous capture. And then we swap that list in instead of driver license database, and what we do is we compile our estimates again. I should say each time we're comparing estimates, we typically use the population pyramid style here, where we have the confidence intervals plotted, and it's easy to see if they're out of line or not. So that's kind of our diagnostic and what we're doing. So when we compare the two list Bs, the population estimates with the two list Bs, because the QNHS is far smaller than the driver activity data set, we're going to get much broader confidence intervals. But it doesn't provide us any evidence that the DLD or there's any difference between the two sets of estimates. So that gives us some kind of reassurance about the validity of our list B driver estimates. But then we go down and we're happy with our estimates. We have another opportunity to go back and iterate through. When we've done all of that and we're kind of happy that we've answered all the questions and all the stuff that we feel may be a problem, that's when we finalize our population estimate. So it's an iterative process using the toolkit. And we kind of use the population pyramid style graphs to evaluate how we're doing as we go. So what happened once we applied these methods, and what did we end up doing? At the end of the day, we did find erroneous records. One of our data sources we were using wasn't coming directly from the data system, but was actually a proxy for people receiving the state pension rather than coming directly from it. It was something we thought was acting as a good proxy we could take as given that it was. So what we did, we removed that data source. Okay. The other thing we did, that caused a problem then in the upper age category, and we did find when we removed that data source. So we didn't have good coverage up in that higher level age categories. So we didn't have the health benefits data set for 2011 and 2012. We have it for 2013, 14, 15, 16. So what we did is we reverse aged that health benefits data set, thinking if people are alive in that data set, then they were obviously alive in the state in that previous data set. They were very, very unlikely to have immigrated in. Okay. Then we don't have driver activity for the younger age cohort below 17. But there's no reason for material undercoverage in the SPD below 17 years of age. Well, that's what we're making that statement assertion, because we have high coverage between child benefit and school enrollment data. And then, because we've added in and we've got high coverage on our SPD in the older age category, we may have had suspected violations of that homogeneous capture in the elderly female cohort. But that's very much mitigated by the high level, almost complete coverage in that category. So we're kind of happy to let that go. And the other thing we did then is anybody that we identified with less than 20 weeks work employment in the employee tax data source, we kind of trimmed in them. But we didn't do that for any. We only trimmed them to tune our population concept towards the annual resident population. So if you've less than 20 weeks and you've no sign of life elsewhere, there's no evidence that you have a significant residence in period in this state. And each time we do post-stratify our block by single year of age, gender and nationality grouping. So what do the estimates look like? In terms of list A, the estimated coverage is up over 90%. We have a little dip in 2016, and this is just as a result. At the time of compilation of these estimates, we didn't have the higher education data source, so that wasn't in the SPD. But that doesn't matter because we're still adjusting for the undercoverage anyway to get unbiased estimates. But it probably results in a slightly higher CV, possibly. The estimates themselves look coherent. They're rising kind of as we'd expect. And the CV is very low. And you'd expect that given the size, the large size of the lists A and B. And again, this is all adding over, summing over the blocks. So just I take an in-depth look at 2016 using a population pyramid. Okay, so this is, first of all, we just have a look at list A, which is the statistical population data set, which is in blue, and compared to the PECADO population data set. And this is back answering the question I left you with at the end of the last session. Where would we expect to see the holes in the SPD? We definitely see them in the adult age population, more so on the males rather than the females. And then we can also see the impact of the dropping of the higher education enrollments, you know, by that just dip in around the 20 age group category. We plotted, just for comparison purposes, the census usually resident in 2016 in red. And again, we can compare that to the PECADO population estimates. In the Irish PECADO project, it's an annual resident population, so it's resident any time in the period. So you really have to subtract the emigration before census night and also subtract the immigration after census night from the PECADO estimate to get back to the census one. You know, look, we made a best effort to remove erroneous records. There could be unidentified or hidden erroneous records on either of the lists, which are inflating our estimates. We could actually have a problem with our homogeneous capture assumption not holding for list B. It just wasn't picked up when we validated the list because maybe the survey we used wasn't sensitive enough to pick up that approach. Or the final one is the possibility of census undercoverage. In Ireland, we go out traditional census. We don't have an internet thing, but the census is the census. We don't adjust for undercoverage or estimate undercoverage in the Irish census. So that's a possibility also. So we said this toolkit can be applied in a broad range of settings. So we started thinking about the census models and how it could be applied in the census models. So in the traditional way, we apply a coverage survey. We have census is list A and survey is list B, and they both try to satisfy the homogeneous capture assumption and no erroneous records and error-free linkage. In the PECADO environment, we've actually relaxed those assumptions. So we only require the list B, the homogeneous capture, and list A can be any fixed list. So we have two admin lists there. So to think about census models, so list A can be any suitable admin list with no erroneous records, and list B can be a survey or census. So this got us in thinking that you could actually use an admin list to estimate the coverage of the census by considering the census as list B, satisfying the assumptions about equal capability. Okay. This also has implications as well for evaluating and testing various scenarios in terms of census modernization and coverage surveys. Because if you think about it, we will have a ready-made test bed if we've already done a traditional census. We'll have a complete census. We can choose various admin lists and try and link it to either samples of various sizes coming from the census and just evaluate what's happening each time. So it has also implications for the traditional coverage survey, you know, that we don't need to maybe have a big field follow-up, that we can just satisfy ourselves with a simple admin list. These are the possibilities. So we applied some of these ideas in the census 2016. Okay. Just so happened that we have our census identification numbers put on our census with a view to publishing enhanced statistical products. We're able to link census data with admin data to get analysis like household income in census year and so on. And we did that operation. We have about, I think, is it about just over 90% of the census with a PPSN number or an identification number attached that we can link to the admin data. Any ones that we had trouble with, we didn't code for the fear of introducing errors. So what we have now is we have our census numbers. Now we have our trim census, which are the ones where we have an identification number. We assume that the trim census now is our list B and satisfies the equal catchability assumption or homogeneous capture assumption. We assume the records that we couldn't find a PPSN for, we just assume missing at random in using that. We then choose a list B. So what we choose is, we choose welfare payments in April of that month and use that as a science of life just to create a list A, an admin list as list A, and census is our list B. And we do our calculations and we follow through. Again, we don't have coverage at the under 20 category, so we use the PECADO population estimate there, and we come up with a final population estimate, census adjusted estimate of just over 5 million. So this shows that it can be done. And then when we compare this adjusted estimate with the PECADO estimate using the population pyramids, we see the small gaps appearing in the younger adult age groups, which kind of suggests migration as a plausible explanation. Okay, so I think we're getting close to the end. And we've presented the simple idea, the toolkit, we've applied it and compiled the population estimates. I would suggest we have made a reasonable case that our estimates are robust. Leave that up to the reader to ultimately to decide. I hope I've done a good job of presenting the toolkit in a simple way and showing how it can be extended and how it can be used for going beyond just under coverage. This can it be used in the absence of identification numbers? There may be challenges, but I think from earlier we've shown that it is possible, that we are linking records from different data sources in the absence of identification numbers, So it is possible. The UK has shown us that, and also Statistics New Zealand. Yeah, population concepts is probably something that's probably take a session on its own at some stage, I think. So what else have we done? In the underlying thesis, we also took this TSE toolkit and extended it to estimate the population flows in a population system. And those population flows are constrained by the stock estimates. So it's a stocks first type system. And how we did that is we used the TSE toolkit to estimate the population that were there in year 1 and year 2. And then, so we call them stayers across 2 years. And then subtracting them from the population in year 1 and year 2, we're able to get an estimate of inflows and outflows. We have been looking at geography, and we know that's a challenge we have. We've been looking at the match to see if we can use DSE there. There's an idea around a calibrated DSE where we use the match to reapportion and calibrate down the population estimates for the domain misclassification in the geography. I think it works well at a high level from initial work, but when we get down to detailed geography of small numbers, we start to run into some difficulties. And just finally, I'd just like to say thanks, if I can, just to the many people who have helped, commented, critiqued, and discussed the workings in this paper along the journey. For me, it's been really greatly appreciated, not just, but also on a kind of social level. It's been very welcome. On that note, I'll hand back to the chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. You have a thank you. John, that's great. I'd now like to invite the proposer for a vote of thanks, and this is from Owen Abbott of the Office of National Statistics.
Thanks, John. Thank you, the chair. As mentioned, I'm Owen Abbott from the Office for National Statistics. I head up a team there who are responsible for methods in official statistics. I'm very honoured to be proposing the vote of thanks for John's work. So what I'm going to do, is give a little bit of context to the work and talk about how across the globe many NSIs are grappling with this problem of population size estimation. I'll give a little bit of history, in particular how DSE was used as part of Census and how it's now evolved as countries are starting to think about, well, okay, how can we perhaps be a bit more efficient? Give a few remarks about the paper and some items for discussion, and then just a vote of thanks. Okay, so a little bit of context. Population size is one of the key underpinning statistics that any nation produces. So it's really, really massively important. It's used for all sorts of things across the nation. And I've put some pictures up there to remind myself. So it's used for things like funding allocation, it's the pots of money. It's used for things like planning where housing needs to be built. That's really, really important. It's used for things like transport planning. Where do people live? Where do they need to move to? And education as well. How many people are there in schools going to need education? So where do we locate those things? So really, really important. And it's used as a key population denominator for many, many other statistics. You know, you see a rate in the news about proportion of the population that have had this applied or have experienced this. The population size estimate is a key underpinning denominator for those things. So it's really important. So a little bit of history. Population size estimation traditionally in most countries around the world started with censuses back into Roman times, and the Chinese ran censuses. That was the main way that nations counted their population. And generally this has evolved into either a decennial or a kind of quinquennial, every 5 years type approach. And then in between the censuses, at whatever frequency, you then have this cohort cohort component method to produce population statistics sizes every year, as John mentioned. That relies really heavily on migration measurement. Now, in some countries throughout the world, they started replacing their censuses with population registers from about the 1960s onwards. And those countries of us that still operate decennial censuses look very jealously upon those countries who can say, well, the population register, that is the population size. I don't need to do any more. We can all go home. Fortunately, some of us can't run population registers, so we're still trying to grapple with the challenge as to how to make population size estimates. Censuses in the meantime have evolved, they haven't stayed still, and there have been lots and lots of innovations to try and make sure that they are as complete as possible and approximately unbiased. Post-enumeration surveys, particularly in the States from the 1950s onwards, started to make sure that censuses were providing those approximately unbiased population size estimates. And in the last 4 or 5 decades, we've seen increasing use of administrative data to help compile the census. In some cases, now administrative data is used directly in the census processes, particularly in New Zealand, very innovative in their use. Where we are in terms of access to administrative data, improvements in legislation. John talked a lot earlier about some of the legislative things that got put in place in Ireland that enabled them to think about this kind of approach. And as I said, this is a challenge that many NSIs are grappling with. There's an international community out there who are very, very active, and in John's vote of thanks, the social element of us all coming together and trying to work out how do we tackle this with each of our different contexts has been really, really useful. In ONS in particular, we've been grappling with this since 2010s, possibly even earlier. My own possible claim to the contribution in the paper, I think I claimed the SPD phrase, and I was very, very pleased to see a list of acronyms in the paper, like a good civil servant. You've done so proud there, Joe. Okay, so a few comments about the paper. So essentially, what John and Lee Chun have done is taken the well-established capture-recapture methods, and there's some really good literature out there talking about their assumptions, and they've basically turned it into a really, really nice toolkit through the extensions that John's described, essentially trying to get us to a place where overcoverage is non-ignorable, and therefore you can introduce these trimming concepts to try and help with that, and multiple sources to try and produce these population size estimates in these kind of contexts. And there's a really nice application, and John fabulously described the CSO context within which he was able to apply these methods and develop this toolkit. So I'm really, really pleased that this has kind of advanced the art and given people food for thought. However, always, there are some items for discussion. My take on this is actually that the methods are, as John described, relatively simple, well researched, and this is really therefore a data problem. It does very heavily depend on your context. CSO, unbelievably lucky that they've got a PPSM that means that they can do linkage virtually error-free. So the issue here is what is the context within your working, and therefore what sort of methodology can you use? How do you apply this kind of toolkit? What do you need to think about? And as it's a data problem, I would urge anybody thinking about this and wanting to do some more reading to read the excellent paper by David Hand from 2018 in the RSS Series A, which talks very much about the challenges of administrative and transactional data and using it in this kind of context. So for me, this is about the problem with the data. So really understanding what data do I have available, what's its quality, what chances there of over coverage, understanding that data generating mechanism is absolutely key to this. Other issues that we might want to talk about, and as John mentioned, how do we get this down from national level to local level? Certainly in terms of the uses of the data, local level is where it's at. That's where users demand those really, really key good quality population totals. So how do I look forward to the work that John's thinking about how that might be achieved. The population definitions, again, as you said, that could probably take up another another 1 hour's discussion, if not longer, about how you grapple. And is the concept of usual residence the sort of thing we should be trying to measure? And you gave us some flavour as to how you've been grappling with that in CSO. And lastly, of course, for those of us who don't have a PPSN, how do we deal with record linkage that is not perfect? And I'm sure there probably are methods out there already which allow you to take, if you can measure the linkage error, take account of that in your estimation process. So I think that was all my notes on there. Yeah, so overall, a really, really excellent paper, really, really important part of the journey that a lot of NSIs are going on in developing methods for essentially modernising how we do and how we compile population size estimates. Really look forward to seeing the extensions. And so, therefore, gives me great pleasure to propose a vote of thanks.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Owen. I'd like to call on Natalie Shlomo from the University of Manchester to second the vote of thanks, and Natalie's going to present online. Hopefully.
Yes, I hope everybody can hear me.
You can, that's good.
Okay, good. So I was asked to provide a discussion of the paper, System of Population Estimates compiled from administrative data only. So first I want to congratulate and thank the authors for the very interesting paper. The issues that were addressed are commonly faced by many NSIs, you know, the issue of making more use of administrative data and statistical production systems, the storage, editing, and linking of administrative sources and to other data sources as well, the issue of detecting coverage errors, measurement errors, and finally, the lack of characteristics variables. These are all very common problems being faced now by many NSIs. And earlier in the demo session, you know, the ONS talked about the context of the Italian census and the Israel census. So many NSIs are facing problems trying to incorporate more use of administrative data into their statistical systems, and particularly for census. Many countries are now using a signs of life approach to determine coverage. This is certainly relevant in Italy. And other challenges that are facing NSIs, but were not currently addressed in this paper, are issues around the quality frameworks when NSIs are ingesting data into the NSI, not data that is collected by the NSI, rather ingested to the NSI from various government departments. The issue of what address to use with administrative data and what to do when there's conflicting addresses, and how do we compose households within administrative data. And then finally, the issue of trying to produce a census type microdata where we have a population spine and typically augmented with survey data, and then thinking about mass imputation techniques to produce a census type microdata. And of course, there we would have a coverage weight associated with each record in the microdata. So this is, you know, for the CSO going down the line here of where we need to go for incorporating administrative data into our censuses. So the paper talked about the SPD. Well done, Owen, indeed. This is a term coined by the ONS, the spine of the population. It's based on selected administrative data files. And as mentioned, there is a PPSN number. That means that the linkages have little errors in them. So there's little doubt on the linkage. So this is a big advantage to the Irish context and being able to use the DSC. I'm sure many countries are not in that position where they can think about using a dual system estimation without considering linkage errors. Now, the overcoverage is dealt with signs of life. The definition in the CSO context is that there is at least one interaction with the public service over the past year. And so the focus here is on undercoverage, and the CSO, John, proposed a trimmed DSC where the SPD is now cleaned of any erroneous records, and file B, in this case, was the driver's license data. It only contained adults that applied for or renewed a driver's license and that had their PPSN verified. So the undercoverage was estimated by the PECADO system based on this trimmed DSE. So we saw a very good adaptation of the DSCs to handle both over and under coverage. We saw that there was more flexibility in the assumptions. It only required the homogeneous capture probabilities list B. And we also saw a nice statistical test that was developed to test for heterogeneity in the capture probabilities, basically by differencing a separate versus combined DSE and associating the variance estimate and using the normal distribution critical region. And the methodology is sound for estimating the population size using the method of moments. Now, to verify the results of the PECADO method, there was a sort of quick assessment of the undercoverage of the Irish Census in 2016, where that was used as list B, and one of the administrative files, the social welfare data, was used as list A, and then the PECADO method was applied and found that about 5.2% of the Irish Census had an undercoverage. Now, the approach in the paper assumed that there was no undercoverage in the under 18s and also excluded workers under 20 weeks of employment. So in my discussion, I actually kind of had a lot more questions after reading the paper. It seemed that the paper was basically an application. I mean, it was a report of what was done in the Irish context, but I would have liked to have seen a more of a simulation study showing the robustness of the PECADO based on these seemed rather ad hoc removal of erroneous records. So how were these erroneous records from list A removed? It seemed to be because they were lacking this sort of ID number. Is that the right way to go? What is the impact of removing the erroneous records from list B and sort of this possible lack of representation in list B? For example, in this case, only those that had obtained or renewed a driver's license is in list B. And so I would have liked to have seen more evidence of how robust the PECADO is based on the number of records that seem to be removed in both lists. And particularly, I thought, because K records say were removed from list A as being erroneous records, nevertheless, there was a K1 defined, which were those K records that were removed from list A that were matched to list B. So are they still considered erroneous if indeed we could match those records to list B? So those are sort of my questions. The main question being, is there more evidence of the robustness on based on these erroneous records that are trimmed in order to apply the DSE? I was a bit curious when you compared the driver's license data as list B to the household survey and how that impacted on the representation and on the results of the DSE, particularly because the survey, although it's random and has homogeneous capture probabilities, it's not a whole area that is enumerated, and how that was handled in the trimmed DSE. So that was another question. I would have liked to have seen a bit more discussion around, what happens when we change list B. Now, the assessment of the PECADO seemed to rely very heavily on sort of this quick undercoverage assessment that was done. And I think there needs to be more careful and convincing assessment of the undercoverage of the Irish census. For example, the census was now considered list B in this scenario, and many records were removed from the census's list B, from 4.7 million to 4.3 million records. Was that justified? and what is the impact of using the social welfare data now as list A. So I would have liked to have seen a bit more, maybe a paper in itself, but looking at more detailed assessment or convincing assessment of the undercoverage of the Irish census in order to sort of say, well, the PECADO method seems to work or not. So my general questions, maybe this is irrelevant, but when I talk about dual system estimation, I'm assuming that the list A and list B are sort of developed independently. So for example, in a census context, you have the census and then you have an independent coverage survey that was completely driven independently from whatever processes were carried out in the census in order to meet these assumptions of, the multinomial assumptions of the DSC. And I'm wondering, what is the justification for that if we're using these sort of administrative lists as list A and list B for the DSC? And I'm also curious, the fact that you're removing these erroneous records from list A, which I said seemed to be kind of ad hoc. What would happen if instead of just removing the erroneous records, you actually put a distribution around this overcount, say give it a Poisson distribution, or do some sort of introduce more modeling into this multinomial model of the dual system estimating, in other words, to try and put in a little bit more statistical properties around this overcount and perhaps introducing a distribution around these overcounts. I'm also interested to hear what a periodic coverage survey might look like in Ireland, and any plans for developing perhaps an integrated household survey, where some countries are thinking that in the sense that maybe after 5 years of an integrated household survey, we might be able to assess coverage as well for an administrative census. So if there are any plans to do that. And then given the multiple administrative data sources and survey data, did you consider a multiple estimation system or a triple system estimation, which might have better coverage for different parts of the population? So those are just a few general questions I had after reading the paper. And finally, your authors conclude that PECADO can provide annual population estimates by gender and age, and also mention the potential to estimate migration statistics. And as I mentioned, I think this needs to be more supported by more evidence-based research on the robustness of PECADO to uncertain overcoverage and lack of representation in the lists. Thinking about, again, the periodic coverage surveys and how they might develop in the context of PECADO and the Irish census. And as mentioned in the final remarks, the challenge is to develop an administrative census with correct address language, address location, and household information, and associating perhaps a coverage weight to each household and individual. And I think that should be sort of the ultimate goal. And finally, I must say there needs to be greater effort and cooperation at the European level and also internationally, given that many countries are facing the same challenges of transforming their population statistics, thinking about revising recommendations and guidelines, coherence of definitions and methodology. What is a census population? What defines a household? And I'm sure that as we go forward, these committees or the UN or whatever, OECD, or all these countries need to start addressing some of these more general questions. So I thank the authors again very much for the paper, and happy to hear further comments.
Great, thank you very much. So thank you very much to Speaker John Dunn and our proposer and seconder. And now is the time that we applaud all three, please. So we can now move on to an open discussion session. Each speaker has up to 5 minutes to speaking time, and they get up to 400 words in the journal. First of all, I'm going to invite people who've already suggested that they'd like to say something. and we have 4 speakers here. The first one is Bernard Bafor, the Australian National University, and he's online. So please, Bernard.
Thank you. Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right, thank you. I'd like to thank the authors for this highly relevant and well-written paper on population estimation. Provides a great exposition on population estimation in these challenging times. While it was focused on Ireland, my opinion is that the results can be applied in many countries. Those countries that are developing administrative registers as a way of examining the accuracy through a purposely defined survey, and those with developed administrative systems by essentially using the survey to plug the gaps in these registers. As the authors have mentioned, this approach offers a very valuable and viable solution to the challenges faced by national statistics offices in terms of producing reliable, timely census data that are cost efficient and also very, very accurate. But more importantly, can effortlessly fit into the usual activities of the statistical office instead of actually being a logistically complicated system that's actually happening. What I actually want to talk about is my specific comments, and I think Natalie and Owen actually mentioned that as well. My concerns are the use of the trimmed DSE methods to deal with their own erroneous records or over coverage, because it means it appears to be the main stumbling block for most national statistical offices with an underdeveloped registry system. Critically, this relies on the assumption that it is possible to trim erroneous records in the list A. That's the population register, in order to reduce the bias of the naive DSE. But what happens if you under trim or if you over trim? Because I'm thinking that what would happen is that the estimates are going to be highly variable. And in particular, it'll be more of an issue when you're trying to get at a small area level, which actually, as Owen mentioned, that's really important for most national statistical offices. They need to get the censuses at a small area level. And so that's just my comments. But I'd like to just end by saying that this is a really, really interesting paper, and I commend Lichon and John for their work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Our second person who's asked to speak at the meeting is Aaron Chind from Wakefield. If you want to let him.
It's a PDF file.
That's the PDF. Thank you.
Yeah, I was worried the graphics were not sharp properly. But
Yeah, I can see it.
PDF is much more reliable. To start, I would like to thank Dan and Zhang for bringing this paper up for discussion. It would appear that a lot of us, not just statisticians, have a view on what a census should be and how it should be done. So I thought, having qualified in economics as well, I realized that most of the use of statistics is for economic purposes. So there's a degree of overlap. And I have the honor to be also a physician. So I work in Zone 6, by the way. Although I live in Wakefield. So somewhere in between the head counts and the body counts from birth to death, I believe there are states that are of interest for modeling. I have a bee in my bonnet about multi-state models, so which would fit in very nicely with the kind of statistics that you collect. And explain.
Slide, yeah.
If you make it a full screen, I think it'll.
Yeah, I was showing you how.
Yeah.
Do you know?
Yeah. So if you, I think it's Control.
I'm not sure it will be.
Control. Is it L? Yeah. Control L. Oh, sorry. I think I focused on the wrong thing.
Yeah, it's on the browser, so I don't know how to.
Oh, right. If you have. Is it possible to open in Adobe Reader if you've done that? Yeah.
Yeah, if you know where the file is.
Okay, sorry. So where are we with the... Yes. So which one is me? That's me.
Next one. That's it.
Yeah, open with.
Yeah, I can't attend it.
Yeah.
I'll place it in.
Yeah. So go a few.
We have a few.
Screen names.
Yeah, there's a full screen. So
Yeah, it's grayed out.
oh, it's grayed out. Oh.
Yeah.
I think this is the new version of Adobe. I'm so sorry. I think I'll manage with this. Yeah, I refuse to have the new version on my laptop for that reason, because there's too much innovation all at once. So let me just do this. Yeah, so I'll minimize that one as well.
Yeah, sure.
In my line of sight. Okay, so I don't know if you recognize the photograph I've got on the left. The censuses were a huge burden to people. Under pain of punishment, the Romans demanded that you go and get yourself counted. And so I think the roles have reversed slightly. And the burden is on statisticians and other people to make adjustments accordingly. So if you didn't turn up, the Romans would do something really bad to you, so you had to go. I was quite interested with the paper coming out of Ireland, especially given that the largest change in population was after the 1841 census, when they had the potato famine, and the amount of transition in the population exceeded even the Roman word for a huge loss, which is decimation. So 2 million were displaced. Out of 2 million, 1 million were displaced, 1 million died out of a population of 8.5. And that level of the population has never been reached in Ireland ever since. So do you have people in flux? So it raises its own challenges. Okay, so some of the thoughts that went through my mind was about the recapture techniques, especially because it refers to captive populations and is used quite a lot in ecology. And this is a technique that's used for example, thermodilution for calculating cardiac output as well. So a more flexible approach would be something that we could consider. So and also, if you use administrative data, you bypass the challenge of reveal preference, because people may tell you what they want you to know as opposed to what they're actually doing. So I realize the science of life approach is something that is favored by the CSO, both for individual as well as firm level data. My own interest is in labor market outcomes. For example, for fitness to practice hearings, when doctors get done for what's called misconduct, professional misconduct. So you use compositional data because the actual denominator may not be available to you. So this is the kind of administrative data that I'm interested in. So what I'm offering is I'm inviting people in the demography or the statistical offices to consider the use of my multi-state models. For example, 3 states might be alive, resident, and dead. So you have the hazard, if you like, of moving from alive to resident, and from resident to died. And of course, this would be the absorbing state. So that would be the source, and that would be the absorbing state of the sink. So this is real data, but this is not from Census, because I don't work in a Census department. So your 3 states may be alive state, pensions, state pension state, and died state. And this would have implications economically, because the government would be liable for paying your pension, and you can calculate the transition probabilities and the expense that the state would incur. So this is how, is everyone familiar with multi-state models, or can I briefly go through? So I thought if you can have models depending on transitions. For example, under follow-up, at 17 weeks, you might have a transition or no transition depending on what happens to you. So we can plot what are called stacked probability plots, which you read from below upwards. So so when you're alive, you have a probability of being alive of 1, whereas if you, and with the passage of time, you become less and less probable of being alive. And of course, this could be one of several transition states. So you can compare people, say, at age 30 or age 60, whether they're likely to move out of the area or have some economic outcome of interest. Yes, I'm almost done. So you can use spatial mapping. I think this was mentioned in by previous speakers as well. But the value of having multi-state models as well as spatial models, it may surpass the expense of the complexity induced. So I have noted that the science of life approach is used by several other statistical agencies. And I've noted a PDF from Italy that have used administrative sources and survey data. And the US Census Bureau also uses a combination of administrative data and enumeration. So since there is, of course, a specter of surveillance, which George Orwell spoke about in referred to as Big Brother in 1984, the book. To note, I might invite you to Beasts of England, Beasts of Ireland, Beasts of every land and clime, hearken well and spread my tidings of a golden future time. And the relevant references are for those who might be interested. And there's one particular author who's particularly prolific in this, who's authored a paper and even a book on multi-state modeling and populations. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Our next discussant is Paul Smith from University of Southampton. Thank you, Paul.
I want to make just a few remarks about this paper, because I don't have very long. So I have 3 general headings. I wanted to think about was the generality of the approach. So is there a need for this single person number? So things certainly get much easier in Ireland because we have this PPSN. And that's kind of an implied population spine, something that tells you, that allows you to link all the sources. I know in the UK that there is, England and Wales, an attempt to create a population spine from administrative data. But that's not quite the same in that you have all the problems of linkage in those cases. We could maybe compare that with an overcoverage scenario where you have lots of linked administrative data sets without that common ID. So in the case where you have to create all of those things, then there's a much greater risk that you end up with a data set which includes, because you've linked something linked together, you've duplicated some people by not making a link where you should have done. So that seems a little bit more complicated, whether it's possible to remove that kind of overcoverage with the trimming approach that you started with. I wanted also to have a little thought about the concept. You want to go off into the discussion about what that should be, but I did wonder how narrowly in time you academic approach. So you've tended to take a whole year's worth of data and whether somebody interacts, but there was just a little bit in the paper that said somebody will count if they've been in employment for 20. So could you focus down to say just the 20-week bit is present for 20 weeks now, I'll count them. And ultimately, you'd like to get maybe down to where the census is, which is to have a single reference day. So you could maybe say on this reference day, has somebody been present for 20 weeks up to it? So you could maybe get down even to where the census is. So just a question about how narrowly you could get down with the PECADO approach. A few specifics for the application in Ireland. You say that signs of life are strong evidence of residence, and I kind of agree that they're evidence of residence. I wanted you to justify just a little bit more that they were strong. So I can imagine people, for example, living abroad but paying some tax in Ireland for certain reasons, so you would get a financial transaction. It wasn't clear to me from whether those kinds of people are identifiable in some way in your admin data, and therefore whether you start, or whether there are some people there who have some evidence of residence, but you can't really be sure whether they're resident or not based on what you see. The 20 weeks I mentioned on the previous slide, so I'll go over that one. I also wonder, suspiciously, about the rules for getting an Irish driving licence. And I did go and look at the web link, and I was quite reassured, but I still have this niggling suspicion if in, let's say, the UK, for the sake of argument, and your parents live in Ireland and you've got an Irish driving licence, do you make an application with your parents' address and maybe your own PPSN if you've got one, because you used to live in Ireland, and does that work? And are there some people in that driver licence? And then I wondered about cross-border workers. You can imagine somebody working for 20 weeks in Ireland and 20 weeks in the UK, maybe not all continuous, so maybe they would meet your residence definition in more than one country. So can you deal with those? And my third little group of things was about the methodology. So you talked about trimming off the overcoverage parts, but that there's a trade-off there because the variance goes up. And you did say that you'd like to keep the variance as possible. See some little more evidence about what happens to the bias and the variance together. That mean squared error. And have you really made the smallest mean squared error by the approach that you offer here? And I kind of guess that you do, but I'm only guessing that because there isn't I like to see. A comment on the test. I think I might have answered this one for myself, but the two equations in the paper that are the basis of the test of whether there's the stratified populations. It's kind of just nested log linear models. So I wonder whether you could do almost the same test by fitting those two nested models and just doing a model comparison. I think that you can, but I'll give away the answer. The equation that you showed, which has the two brackets, the rate's the same and the coverage is the same. I think in my test, I would only test the same. So if the coverages were actually similar, then I wouldn't have such a good test. And my final thought was around the survey, using the QNHS survey. So lots of people ask regularly the question, can I use an ongoing national survey as a coverage survey in a census type approach? And the answer to that is generally, I'm not sure I can because I'm worried about the non-response. I was quite interested that when you do use the QNHS as a coverage survey, you got something that was quite similar to what. Are you really reassuring me or telling me that the non-response bias in the QNHS doesn't have an impact? Population size estimation bit, and that kind of worried me just a little bit, but that I expected it to have an impact because there must be this differential non-response there, and you're not quite dealing with that. So those are my set of questions, and I really liked this paper, so I'd like to Leechan on this new thinking about how to do administrative population census and actually managing to apply that in real life in a country. So that was great. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. And our fourth discussant here is Fabrizio Solari, Italian National Institute of Statistics, and that is also online. Go ahead.
Since 2020, the Italian Institute of Statistics has been producing population size estimates using administrative data only. The backbone of this process is the extended population register, which is built just integrating the population register with administrative data containing source with administrative data which containing individual signs of life. And so the extended population register provides a list of candidates for the inclusion in the usually resident population. And based deterministic rules are applied to the extended population register to remove from it the individuals which are not considered to be part of the usually resident population. Furthermore, similarly to Ireland, audit checks are planned to be carried out for quality assessment of the population size estimates. Okay, you can go to the next slide. Thank you. Okay, the extended population register contains a list of potential usual residents. So by design, it is affected by overcoverage. Besides, it is designed not to suffer from undercoverage, or at least to suffer from negligible undercoverage compared with overcoverage. So it's a different situation from the person activity register in Ireland, which is designed to minimize overcoverage. And as a consequence, it is affected by undercoverage. So the rationale under the Italian extended population register is symmetric with respect to the choice adopted in Ireland. So we have an extended population register in Italy, while in Ireland, let me say, there is something like a trimmed population register. So it is tried to reach the target population from two opposite directions, adjusting for overcoverage in Italy and adjusting for undercoverage in Ireland. Next slide, please. So I just wonder why are the point to take a different choice. I guess that in Italy we adopted the extended population register because a population register is available, and since it is not good enough to provide population size estimates by itself, it's anyway a strong and relevant source of information on usually resident population. And another question is, could the two ideas be combined together? For instance, talking with Lei Chun some months ago, he suggested us to use a trimmed population register to adjust for the audit survey under enumeration. So my final question is, what's your opinion about that? Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Fabrizio. Excellent. So thank you for those four planned discussion points. I now invite some contributions from the floor, but we do have one already, an online request to speak. So if we start off with that, and if anyone else wants to speak after that, then I'll invite you to raise your hand. So Michael Baxter from Kantar Media has asked to speak. So if you unmute your microphone, 5 minutes to comment.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. In market research, it's very important to know the number of households. I say household addresses, this can be multiple occupation, and also the distribution of household sizes, how many one person, two person, and so on households there are. Is there any way that this methodology can be used to get those data?
Okay, thank you very much. We will be inviting the speakers due course after any further contributions. On here, would like to say something? There's two people, but if you go first, so then and you first, you go first.
Hi, I'm Eleanor Law from ONS. I'm interested to know whether you tried the other administrative sources as a possible list B, as well as just testing out the driver license data set.
Okay, thank you. Short and sweet. If you'd like.
I'm Jackie Vitas from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and thank you. I really, really enjoyed your presentation. I think how you visualised it as well was really, really good. I have not prepared something because I'm actually on holiday here, but I was sitting there. So I head up macroeconomic statistics in Australia, and one of the things I was thinking about was we don't have a register. What we're trying to do is replicate a register, but it doesn't exist. And I was just sitting there and thinking about actually in terms of how we're presenting this here, what we're really doing is we're taking an opening balance sheet position, making changes to it from life events, and then we're ending up with a closing balance sheet position. Should we be thinking more about this? Because when you think about it from a political position, trying to convince people that these are the estimates you should use, reasons like Owen was saying, maybe that would actually help in terms of how we're talking about this, how we're presenting them from more of an accounts perspective, and then thinking about how we then implement things like, the presentation. So that was my random thought, but thank you very much for your presentation.
I think since you've got a written contribution, perhaps you can combine it with that one.
Yes. Sorry, you want me to?
If it's very quick, you can cover just. Yeah. Say your name again. Oh yeah. Okay. And we have another person online too.
When I first Googled PECADO to find out if there were any papers on it, I found a reference to the meaning of PECADO in Portuguese, which means sin. From whence we have our word peccadillo, which means a minor fault. And I think the presentation and the paper is a reminder of Box's aphorism that all models are wrong and some are useful. And I think we have to remind ourselves that even with all the effort in the world, you're still going to get an estimate, real number. And one question I would like to ask is of the authors is, can you see PECADO being used for all countries? And when are the instances when it would not work? I appreciate that for a tiny population of 4.5 million to 5 million, you would have great success. But there are people who want to live off grid. US is one example. It's very difficult to have everyone interact with public services at least once, as per your model.
And the person on the online, I think James Brown, please, if you'd like to unmute and your contribution, say your affiliation.
Yeah, James Brown from the University of Technology, Sydney. I won't turn my camera on because it's 2:30 in the morning and I'm in my bed and the dog just came as well. So just wanted to really say I thought this was a really nice paper. I very much enjoyed reading it. And thanks to John as well for the really nice presentation of the work. One of the things I thought that was quite interesting about, if I understand the way this approach works, is that this actual ID number in Ireland actually means that if every person in Ireland has to have this ID number, if I understand correctly. So in fact, if you start with all the ID numbers, you actually start with an overcoverage problem. Then by applying the signs of life, you turn it into an undercoverage problem and then come back. And I guess that was perhaps what the Italian contributor was just querying here, is about, is it actually necessary to go from an overcoverage problem to an undercoverage problem and back again? Or can you, just try and trim back, in some sense, the overcoverage to the level you want? There was also some discussion about the need to move forward to get to lower levels of geography, and this issue, of course, then when we start working with administrative data sources and we have multiple addresses. But I thought that one of the things here, presumably, that's quite interesting is that this driver license database, because it's people who have updated recently their driving license, that you would assume that their location was accurate, and therefore can you use that as the basis for actually producing your estimates at lower levels. And I'm thinking here of the PREG approach that they use, the ABS uses in Australia, where you have the survey and the census, and some of the characteristics don't align across the two, but the actual estimator is built to believe that the survey characteristics are correct. And in this case, you would be saying, well, I believe that the list B, which is only the sample, has that correct location. And I suppose finally, the last point is I think a lot was made in the paper about this idea that there's no longer this requirement for there to be an independence between list A and list B. But that doesn't feel to me quite right, just by stating that list A is fixed numbers and therefore I don't have to worry about it. Because of course, in this case, list A is the PAR, which is based on people having interactions. It's just a stochastic exercise that happens over the year. It's a process by people are interacting with the government. And being in the DLD is the same process going on over the same year. And so at the end of the day, it seems to me you still are in the end arguing that whether you are having activity or not on those other lists in that year is not related to whether you're renewing your driving license or not. And if that holds, then of course it's going to be okay. And then of course the conditional independence statements will work. But if in fact, for example, when someone migrates to Ireland, presumably they will be much more likely to interact with all of these activities. They'll have to get a driving license. They'll also potentially be doing many of those other interactions with government. And so you can imagine that there could be situations where being in the driving license database is not really quite independent as the fact that you're appearing or not appearing in the others. But overall, I really enjoyed reading the paper and really enjoyed staying up to listen to the talk.
Yeah, very pleased that you did, James. Thank you. Any other comments from the floor and online? Would you like to, before I invite you up, you would like to give a rejoinder, would you, both of you, or? We do have a couple of written contributions, but I think that you've seen them or you will be able to see them. So we should perhaps go straight on to your rejoinder.
Like, as I said, I think there's a lot of potential there in it. I'm really excited about the toolkit. I would like to really thank the people that have made comments. They're thought-provoking and challenging and give a lot of food for thought. And from a personal level, I don't know if each one has anything to add, but from my perspective, I'd really like the time to take them away and give them the due consideration that they deserve.
You have the opportunity to give a more considered reply in the journal, of course. So you're not expected to respond to all of them now. There's an opportunity for that. But if you had any comments quickly that you wanted to give back.
Pass forward to you, Legion, or do you want to? I'm not going to.
Couple of things, just a couple of things. I think. Okay. Again, thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for the online and raising questions and issues and also comments. So I don't want to go sort of picking details about the particular question and so on, because I think it's not the right place and time. But I want to maybe just say something broad while listening to many of the comments. And so I think the first thing, probably the most important takeaway message, something I was mentioning to you, is the census transformation is more or less inevitable unless it is written by law. You have to do a census. Then before the law changes, you cannot change this. The broad trend is that all internationally, every country is trying to, if legally possible, want to move on from the traditional census way of doing population statistics. That is the broad trend. That is, we just have to recognize it. And the main reason, I think, is on the front. One is the cost. The other one is how relevant, how quickly, how frequently. So these things combined together means that the broad trend is clear. You have to find a way unless law says you are not allowed to move. That's I think that first we have to recognize this. Once we recognize this, I think the next step is to say, what is future population statistics like? Then I think you have to get rid of the image that the future population statistics will look like you have a census like fire and add up for your purpose, because you not doing census anymore. So you should focus on statistics rather than the fire you have in the picture. Or you try to say, how would my fire get now look like compared to the census? And with all respect. Now, at the end of the day, it's fit for purpose. It's thinking about the statistics. Where statistics you're getting is coming from a micro level kind of fractional counting type of idea, more or less, or the macro count of macro ways of changing the numbers to get a balance sheet or so on. These people will just have to find out what is right. But at the end of the day, it will be kind of a fit for purpose statistics perspective on this new thing now. You should get rid of the mental image that I'm comparing to what I used to have. No, that's not the thing you're going to have because you're not doing census by definition. That's it. So I think another important thing going forward is actually the quality assurance. Whatever you do, since you don't have the census, you don't have this mental image now, how do you quality assure what you do? For example, you say, the PECADO, the numbers. How do I quality assure this? I think that is the next thing, important thing, is getting a kind of what I call audit sampling perspective. So you need to collect some data, hard data and so on. You can't just say, this is what I think, and I think what I think is right. It's not going to convince everyone. Some kind of validation needs to be, and that needs to require some external data. However, I call that auditing inference rather than survey sampling, is because I'm not using those additional data, extra data collected to produce a population statistics. I'm only using that quality validity to that extent. I think this is fit for purpose. I think these are the broad trends we will probably be going toward. And then we can discuss in accomplishing this, whether the detailed solution, how far you go, which country goes for what. I think we will see a diversity of things because different countries have different history, different data situations, I think. But that's what I want. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I think that draws to a conclusion. Thank you very much for everyone's contributions. Before we have a final thank you to the speakers, just want to mention that the next discussion meeting will be at the RSS conference. We usually have a discussion meeting on the end of one of the days, and people come along to that without paying for the conference registration, or you can sign on online to listen to that. And the topic it's a multi-paper meeting, and the topic of the meeting is statistical aspects of machine learning. And so that will be very interesting, and that will be September the 6th, Wednesday, yes. The actual conference is in Harrogate, of course, and but the discussion meeting is a separate thing, which is part of the conference. And we also have one more discussion meeting, at least one more this year, and that's on the 3rd of October. A Series B paper entitled Parameterizing and Simulating from Causal Models, and that's by Evans and Diddley. That'll be it's probably hybrid. Yes. So again, so you'd be very welcome to come to that. Full details of all the upcoming discussion meetings are available on the website and also on newsletters and on Twitter. And if you'd like to be informed personally about discussion meetings, then we do have a distribution list. And if you send an email to journal@rss.org.uk, then you can be added to that, and that gives you, make sure Before we close, I'd just like to say you're all invited upstairs for some refreshments. We have some onion juices and some nibbles, which is very nice. But most importantly, I'd like to thank the speakers and the contributors and all the discussants. I think it's been excellent. Thank you very much.